Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. A slightly different episode this week. Later in the show, we'll be joined by Nick Compton, who leads us into a fascinating deep dive into one of England's greatest wins of the 21st century, their 2-1 series victory in India back in 2012. Elsewhere in the show, we'll talk about Colin Graves' mooted return to Yorkshire, Steve Smith moving up to the top of the order for Australia, some more on England's upcoming tour of India, the shortest test match ever at Cape Town, and we'll answer your questions and more. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Ben Gardner. Mark Butcher will be joining us later in the show. Ben, we've just spent 45 minutes with Nick Compton, and I think that was one of my favourite interviews we've ever done for the podcast.
Yeah, it's so interesting, wasn't it? I mean, partly just because that was such a good series that only gets better kind of the further we get away from it and the further anyone gets from repeating it. And I almost think the one thing we didn't say to Compton was really emphasising his own part in that series, because I think you can look at it now and look at the numbers of all the bats, and I think all of the top six, apart from an average 40, but him coming into that first series and the hardest place to tour, as different as you can get to playing in England basically, and to just resist for so long early in the innings as he did, it was just crazy. And just it's such a fascinating chat hearing about how England went about preparing, playing spin, how different batters would play spin, what it was like inside the change room, inside the hotel rooms even, was really, really, really interesting, and a tour I don't think I'll ever get tired of discussing, just because of how incredible it was.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time for English cricket as well, because you sort of look back at that general period and it is described as maybe England's most successful test side in the last 50 years. But that was actually a not very good year. The famous home series against South Africa, which was Strauss's last, I had the whole KP drama. But actually that last winter, the winter in between 10-11 and 12-13, two of England's most famous ever winters, is actually a really difficult winter where they play Sri Lanka and Pakistan and the UAE, and they don't do well against spin. So for them to, the year after that, to go to India and win, and it's also, everyone says it's one of England's most impressive series wins, but it occupies a weird space in people's minds, because I don't think it was one of those series where the masses were necessarily watching it ball by ball, even compared to an Ashes series away from home, for example. So actually, there's a lot of detail that I think people might not remember that well. My highlight of that conversation was when he was talking about how good Monty Panesar was that tour. When you look through the 11s of both of those sides, it's absolutely packed full of all-time greats. And it was Panesar who had an up and down England career, and actually in the second half of his career didn't play that much for England. Panesar was the person who Compton reserved his most effusive praise for. Anyway, here is that conversation with Compton, not only on the 2012 series, but looking ahead a little bit to the 2024 series that starts in 2 weeks' time. We're delighted to be joined by former England batter Nick Compton. Nick, pleasure to have you on the show. England head out to the UAE tomorrow for a training camp ahead of that series against India that starts in 2 weeks' time. India's record at home in recent times is extraordinary. In the last 11 years, they've lost just 3 tests, let alone series, on home soil. The last time they lost a home test series, it was against England in 2012-2013, Nick's first series as a test cricketer. Nick, it was some entry into test cricket, one of, if not the toughest tours on the circuit. If we rewind 11 or so years, what sort of headspace were you in going into that tour? It was a very successful England side, but Strauss had just retired, so there was a gap at the top of the order. You'd had an amazing year for Somerset, but there was also competition in the form of a young Joe Root in terms of getting into the side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a mixture of emotions, really. I think, firstly, being awarded my first test cap, getting on tour, and Andrew Strauss had retired, as you said. So I think getting the nod firstly and foremost was a huge thing for me personally. I think the fact that we're going to India again, the mecca of cricket, a place that you dream about playing, and I'd obviously been on many sort of camps and had played there before, but of course not for England on a tour. So this was a double whammy, really. I mean, to go to a place like India and make your debut there. I think, first things first was getting selected. I think the second thing on my mind was to actually get picked for that first test match. As you say, Joe Root and I were the newbies on tour. Kevin Peterson was being this word reintegrated back into the team. So there was probably quite a lot going on. I think personally for me, the headspace was quite focused on, just being there and being fortunate to sort of be there, and then taking the first step of, I actually remember we went to Dubai, went to the UAE as well before that test series. So we had a training camp there, and they tried to produce similar wickets, and Graham Gooch and Andy Flower put us through our paces, and that was great. It was my first chance to get out and work with them. And then, of course, we had these warm-up games, and it was quite interesting because the warm-up games weren't particularly strong. They were decent sides, but I think they made a concerted effort to not challenge us too much in a way that meant that we didn't face, top spinners or the A-side spinners. We played one game against the A-side. I didn't get many runs in that game, and so the pressure started to ramp up on me because I think there were two warm-up games coming up, and it was kind of do or die in a way that, I had to score some runs. And fortunately, I managed to get some runs and get selected for that first match. So that was kind of the first things first. In terms of the aura and the atmosphere around the whole series, again, I don't remember there being a huge pressure. One, because I think there was a new captain. Alistair Cook had now taken over. So there was a sense of newness around the camp. I think, Kevin Peterson coming back into the team created people on best behavior, not sort of, walking on eggshells, but, everyone had obviously been given the smack on the back of the hand, and KP was now back in, and there was like this new behavior and how are we going to go forward? So in many ways, I think that was a very healthy place to be, because some of the old behaviors, at least, pushed away, and there was a newness to it. So that was a great starting point.
Mm. I guess like that England side is remembered very fondly, had a lot of success, but what people perhaps don't remember, especially going into that tour, was it was actually quite a difficult 12-month period, not only off the pitch with the whole Peterson off the field stuff, but also on the pitch. England hadn't been as successful as they had been before, and then would go on to be in India. With what was happening off the field as well, was it an awkward team environment, or for you as a newbie, was it all very much focused on that first test match?
Yeah, I wouldn't say awkward, but there was no doubt that the relationships, Kevin Peterson, in that changing room was slightly awkward. I don't think he made any bones about that. I think we had some conversations about what had happened. I remember sitting in his room one evening and him talking about, Andy Flower and some of the other guys in the team. And yeah, I don't think he was particularly positive about them, but, knowing KP, didn't really mince his words. And in many ways, what he said was very matter of fact. And I sort of came in and was very neutral in all of this. I was kind of head down, wanted to get my head down and just work hard and obviously do the job that I knew I could hopefully do. So that was my focus. But I suppose from a journalistic point of view and from a cricketing fan point of view, it was quite interesting to be right in the middle of it and understand, what the dynamics were and actually see them for myself. So yeah, there was an awkwardness to it. There was a false politeness or superficiality to say some of the relationships, but that's professional sport. Not everyone gets on. And I think, the one thing I would say is that, everyone's obviously high class professionals. So, when KP walked out there, it was great to be around him. I remember Joe Reed and I trying to feed off him and learn from him, the drills he was doing in the nets and working with Mushtaq Ahmed for me were, it was an incredible period of time. And so from a professional standpoint, it was hugely exciting. You had Graham Swan at the top of his business, Monty Pat, they had an incredible team. So it was fine. It worked. And I think I could see that Andy was trying to use KP to talk occasionally about how to play spin in India. And, there was a sense that, we were here to do a job. But there was no doubt that some of the old rumblings and deep feelings were very much still there. But business as usual, and I didn't really care about that, to be honest with you. I was just desperate to try and get in that team. And as I say, when you get in that team, you then say, well, it'd be nice to play more than one test match. There's 4 test matches. If I can play 4 test matches, then I've clearly done a role of sorts, and therefore that would be a good outcome. So that was, I think, the way I managed my own expectations, rather than coming in and thinking, I'm going to take over from Strauss and average 50 in my first series and score 300s. I think that would probably set my sights a little bit too high. I was there. I was partnering one of the great opening batsmen England's had. and if I could stay there with them at the crease, and I felt I was doing a good job. So that was very much my focus.
Mm.
Do you think it can be sort of almost overemphasized, the importance of everyone in a sports team kind of getting along and having these really nice cushy atmospheres? Like I know in the current England environment, they talk a lot about, everyone being mates, having these good times, but also actually, as you say, it's professional sport. People can just, they can be colleagues rather than friends and still put their all in for England. So how much in that stuff actually kind of matters?
Well, I think it does matter. I've always been a huge advocate of being professional, and I think sometimes that's been undervalued or not particularly understood. I do believe that you don't have to be, best mates with everyone in the team, and there doesn't have to be this sort of false harmony or, everyone gets on, because that's not the reality. That's not the case. People go off in different groups. People like spending time having a coffee or dinner with various guys. I mean, people will say that you call them cliques or whatever. I don't really believe they're cliques. I think it's a natural, it's a natural way people, sort of come together. So I found in a lot of teams I played that people try to convey this false harmony and to try and be matey with everyone, which I felt was not healthy. I think it's healthy to potentially have relationships with people that you may not see eye to eye off the field, but I always felt the most important thing was when you're on that field, there was 100% commitment towards, whatever the goal was, for the country or for the team. And I think that was the important thing for me. And I think, playing in that England team, I think there definitely was that feeling that, once we're on the field, once you're touching gloves in the middle, whether there was backstabbing going on outside of that about them personally, so be it. But I also felt that it breeded a natural competitiveness in the team as well, and a natural individuality as well. And I think that's where maybe things have gone forward a little bit more now, is that people are wanting people to be themselves. If it's someone who's a recluse, then be a recluse. If someone doesn't like going out and having beers at night and isn't particularly matey in the bar, then don't be like that. I mean, and not judging that. And I think that would be the important thing, is not feeling like, oh, I'm not at the bar tonight having a few beers because that's not part of my routine or what makes me feel comfortable. But that's not going to deter from me being a team man or being somebody that's liked in the team. I think that's very healthy. I think quite often you sort of feel a pressure to be out for dinner or out doing this or befriending certain people in the team, where actually, that's not conserving of my energy or someone else's. So I'm a big advocate in allowing people to be very much themselves and their own individual sort of personality. And that's not going to please everyone or be liked. But does it matter? I mean, at the end of the day, getting the most out of that individual in the environment, because we are, this is a professional sporting environment, is what matters to me, or at least what I think matters most in a team. So, and I think coming back to that side and bringing it back, I think, that was shown in that environment. There's no doubt there was a segregation in the team. There was no doubt that certain players weren't friendly with other players, but on the pitch, there was a high level of skill and individual kind of people were able to stamp their own individual authority on the match.
Mm. I'm glad you mentioned that training camp to the UAE, because a lot has been made of England's preparation for the upcoming India tour. So England are going to the UAE for something like 10 days. Then they're going to India just 3 days before the first test match. So the big difference between 2024 and 2012 is that England aren't playing any warm-up matches this time round. Before we get to that, I've always been fascinated. What are these training camps like? And as a player, how helpful can they be, especially for a tour like India, where the conditions are completely different to where what you've had at home? So how helpful is this sort of condition specific training camp, even if the location might be different? They're not going to India, they're in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. I think one, it starts to sort of set your mind into gear of what we're coming up against. You're leaving. It's a new temperature, for example. You get a chance to put your spikes in some foreign turf that perhaps will resemble the conditions you're about to go in. So I think that, for one, is nice. I mean, indoor schools coming together in camps in the UK, yeah, is great from a fitness perspective, and maybe hitting some balls there to keep yourself going. But there's nothing like getting out on turf and actually practicing real life sort of scenarios, game scenarios. So I felt that was quite important. An opportunity to face some of the spinners in your own team. Monty Panesar, left arm spinner, Graham Stein. There was obviously the same was going to apply when you played against India. Putting yourself under difficult circumstances, running in the heat, getting that feeling of exhaustion, then having to, bat up again. So there's a whole lot of different scenarios, which of course it's not a match. It's not playing in a test match, but I think it just starts to plant the seed. It starts to, get yourself into gear in terms of what is coming up. And and I think preparation is absolutely key. Going from England straight to India into a test match would be very difficult. And going to Abu Dhabi or to Dubai just gives you that opportunity to just start to understand what it is that we're in for, and the type of pace and the bowling that's going to come up, and what type of plans am I going to have. There's a chance to maybe say, do you know what, I'm actually going to look to sweep, off spin, and that's going to be one of my plans. So therefore, let's actually do that. Let's practice, a bit of Ashwin. Let's get him bowling the lines that he does, and let's see where I feel comfortable. So there's you don't want to be experimenting too much, because you're on the eve of a test series, and your plan should be pretty set. But I think there's always an opportunity to just get a bit more comfortable with those plans and before you get there.
I was going to ask about that playing off spin and how that both for you and among the team, how that kind of like developed across the series. Because when Yas mentioned the stuff on the pitch, there'd been that previous winter when, England got Ajmal, I guess, and they lost 3-0 in the UAE. And then you also had Cook coming in as captain, who was, one of the best players of spin England have ever had, but also did it in kind of his own way. And then Peterson was doing it in his own way as well. How much was it that they were like saying, this is our strategy against spin? Or how much were you trying to work on your own stuff against spin with the coach's guidance? And then also coming into test group the first time, how did that change for you kind of from the first test to the last test, I guess?
Yeah, good questions. I don't particularly remember there being a team plan against spin. There certainly wasn't we've got to be dynamic against them and we're going to take them on. There was nothing like that. There was far more of an individual focus. I think when I came in, I think the coaches were reluctant to input too much, information about facing the spinner, playing in India, Nick, you have to do X and Y. I think there was a certain amount of trust that I was now in the team. I remember when I came into the team, there was a little bit of well, let's see why you're in the team, rather than welcome to the team, let me tell you. It was like, okay, you're in the team now, prove to me why you should be in the team. So I quite liked the tough mentality of, I didn't want to say too much to Andy or Grichi. I wanted to be left to my own devices to go and show how I could play. I think, I'd obviously learned, felt like I could obviously play spin, otherwise I probably wouldn't have been selected in the first place. But, now playing against India in those conditions, you're now up, the sort of, the cameras are going to be on you in terms of, how well you play the spin. But I think there was more of an individual focus on it. I think the only thing we did speak about was obviously, the foot movement, getting forward and back, watching, as I said, KP and how he went about things was quite interesting. We did a few drills there, which helped with no pads on, for example. So Mushtaq would bowl into, a really roughed up area, and, you had to get right to the pitch or right back. So there was a real emphasis on that. Joe Root was outstanding, as a young player. You could even see then that, there was a batsman with high intelligence and someone who's going to be excellent going forward. I mean, you had a lot of players that I think were very experienced. So, Cookie had his own way that, if it was outside his eye line, he would sweep anything straight. He sort of got his bat out in front of the pad. So you're talking about, I felt at least, players that were sort of at the top of their game and quite well versed in how to play spin. This wasn't a young team playing in India for the first time, sort of learning how to play Ashwin and Jadeja. You had guys who were sort of 30 plus years old who had their method and knew what they were doing. I think that's what I remember. And I think there was a self-focus on how is everyone going to individually go about their own game. I think for me, I had quite a set plan on I'm going to back my defense, and I backed my defense against spin. I wasn't somebody who would panic and run down the wicket and play a huge shot, because I felt that was a weak way to go, and I'd rather the bowlers dug me out and got me out with a great delivery, and then so be it, So I think that was the way I was going to build the house, if that makes sense. And I realized in Cookie he had a very sort of set methodology, which he obviously played down to a T, because the ball would almost come out the bowler's hand, and I could see what he was going to do as soon as I saw the line. It was good. That's how good his play was. And how down to a T. If the ball was there, he played like that. If it was there, he did that, and he almost did it with metronome sort of consistency. KP, on the other hand, looked to try and get onto the leg side and take his legs out of the equation, hit through the offside. So he spoke about the great players being able to hit off spin through the offside. So that was something that was new to me, because I think a lot of the great players, the Callises, the Umlers, the guys that maybe I copied, were very much stand on off stump and look to hit off spin straight or through the leg side. KP, on the other hand, looked to actually give himself room and then hit back into the spin. So interesting to see how different players went about it. Obviously, the way KP went about it gave him more scoring options. The way that I went about it was more the offside, look to play straight and work with the spin. But I definitely, through the series, got more comfortable and confident with the bowlers that we were facing, and the pitches. And I think the more time I spent out there, I think it kind of shocked India a little bit. And that was certainly the feedback at the end of the series, that a lot of batsmen perhaps didn't have that patience in past touring teams, not just England, other teams. And there was this whole, narrative about, you're going to India, you've got to take down their spinners. You've got to be positive. You can't, let them bowl at you, because you'll get, and actually I thought the opposite. And I think what that did is actually played into their hands. Whereas the way we played is we built foundations and managed to take Indian spinners into the second and third spells, which perhaps hadn't been done too often.
Obviously, the landscape of international cricket is different now. What do you make of England not playing warm-up matches in India before the start of the first Test match? You mentioned that the standard of opposition wasn't necessarily great when in your warm-up matches. I was actually looking through the scorecards this morning, and in the game against Mumbai, they had a young Shikhar Dhawan and Surya Kumar Yadav bowling quite a lot of overs of off-spin, and Surya Kumar Yadav actually got rid of Joe Root and Jonathan Trott in that warm-up game.
I never played in the series though. Yeah.
No, but yeah, what do you make of England not playing any actual matches?
Well, I mean, I think it's daft. I mean, what do I make of it? I think it's certainly not the preparation you would like as a player, and I'm sure as a coach. I don't know. It's obviously there's time elements and all sorts of things going on there. But I mean, if you're a player, I mean, and I say that the competition we played against wasn't that stiff, but it still made a huge difference to me to get a couple of 50s, for example, hit a couple of balls down the ground, face off spin or left arm spin of sort, and get up and running. I mean, I think that was a huge thing for me. We had 3 warm-up games, and I think it also settled the nerves a little bit. You're not suddenly thrust in there, your debut Test match suddenly in front of Dhoni, Sachin, all these sort of guys. It gave me a chance to get a few runs under my belt and feel some Indian conditions. So I think it makes a huge difference. I think it's really not going to help England at all. I think it's going to be a very tough series for them, given India's success in India, but also given the fact that India have got some very have got some extreme experience on that spin front. And England obviously are going to play a more dynamic approach, aren't they? They're going to play a more aggressive approach, which will be interesting to watch. It has been interesting to watch for the last few years, and it's anyone who's tried to, talk down this Bazball sort of approach has probably been sort of eating their own humble pie in a way. So because it has been great, it's been dynamic. I think this will be a different test. There's no doubt about that. Can they do this in India? In their conditions? There's no doubt it'll be a challenge. I think it'll be an uphill challenge. I still think there'll be moments where Ashwin will bowl well. There'll be moments where you'll have to, dig deep and find ways to keep the good ball out. There'll be moments where, he's going to take wickets. It's just, can England score enough runs in between? And that seems to have been their approach. Yes, bowlers are going to take wickets, but if we score quick enough, then by the time they've taken their 5 wickets, maybe we have 300 on the board. So I think that's been the England approach. I found it a little bit more difficult in India to play that way. The run scoring is not as quick as England outfields. The ball doesn't come on as quickly. It's a little bit more turgid at times, and therefore it might be hard to force the pace in the way that they've done, with pretty consummate ease in the UK.
Moving on to the start of that series, it's a star-studded India side: Sachin Tendulkar, MS Dhoni, young Virat Kohli, Yuvraj Singh, Gambhir, Sehwag, Zaheer Khan, Ravichandran Ashwin. India go 1-0 up, and England are handsomely beaten in that first Test match. I think Pujara gets a lot of runs. What was the mood like after that first Test setback? Back to the drawing board, or sort of, given the calibre of that squad, was it more sort of just backing what they've done before?
Yeah, it wasn't as somber as I thought it might be. I think there could have been, here we go again. I mean, this is going to be a long Test tour. We've got 4 of these Test matches. Sehwag was whacking it all over the park. I mean, we had absolutely no idea, particularly in that first innings. I do remember, though, I think we got 400 in the second innings, or 3. Got a big score in the second innings. Cookie got 100. We put on 100 partnership for the opening bat, and I think that gave us quite a lot of confidence that, hey, we can bat in these conditions. We can get a big score. Okay, we got bullied a little bit in that first innings, and maybe we're taken, by shock a little bit. So, but I don't believe. I remember I think we had a few beers in one of the hotel rooms. We played a little game. And then I think, we're back to business with team plans. I think obviously there was a significant change with Monty being pulled into the second Test. Sam, I think, played that first Test and was dropped. And so, I probably come back to the fact that there was still some, there was a high skilled sort of 11. There were high skilled 11 players in that side, and obviously adding Monty to the equation, was huge. So I don't remember it being all sort of down and out. I think there was a discussion, in the days preceding that about how are we going to go about playing spin. I think again very individual. I was quite happy with my second innings contribution. I spent a lot of time out there, faced a lot of balls, and I felt that was the way to sort of, as I said earlier, build the house or build the foundations. And other players got some runs under their belt. So, I think it was good from the coaches that there wasn't a, what are we going to do now? I think it was a first Test match, and it was a chance to go again. And that's what I remember. I think there was still quite a lot of positivity, to be honest with you. And as I said, there was still a newness to the team. So it wasn't a team that had been beaten regularly, and there was this sort of, you get into this formula and this cycle of, we go again kind of thing. So, I still felt there was, there was, we weren't down and out. That's by any stretch of the imagination.
I mean, bringing Monty in changed the series. Monty had an absolutely brilliant tour. Looking at some of the scorecards, he'd regularly bowl a lot more overs than Swan, and Swan was arguably the number 1 spinner in the world at that time. What are your memories of Monty's series? Because actually, looking back at his career, he only played 3 Test matches in the 3 years leading up to this tour, and he didn't play much Test cricket afterwards. So in terms, if you look at the second half of his career, this is the one real standout tour, and he made such a difference in that series.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I was delighted for Monty. I think the excitement, standing at extra cover, and watching him bowl that way. I mean, I think in sport, and it doesn't matter whether you're watching, whatever sport it is, golf, tennis, rugby, when you see something special happening in front of you, there's like, you almost get a spine tingling feeling, and time stops a little bit, where I think KP's innings in Mumbai in that second, where you got the 180, you're watching something very special that, most human beings would never be able to do. And I think, and watching Tiger Woods and watching, there's been moments where you're in awe. And I think there was definitely a moment where I could feel myself at extra cover. My spine was tingling, and I was like almost brimming with a smile, looking around the field going, this is something pretty special. I mean, the pace he was bowling, the accuracy, watching his body, like you could just feel that things had clicked in a way for him. And I'd actually spent a couple of weeks before that tour in England working with him. The two of us sort of did a little training camp together, and so I'd been batting against him while he was bowling, and we'd worked very intensely in game scenarios and what have you. And to now take that through Dubai into India and watch him bamboozle Tendulkar, Dhoni, Sehwag, and not make them look silly, because that would be a poor term, but really did in a way. They were nowhere. I mean, it was an incredible piece of bowling, and I think it was just amazing to be there at that moment. It was a special time, and I doubt anyone's ever bowled better in Indian conditions.
Did you get a similar sort of spine-tingling feeling kind of watching Alistair Cook's series? Because I think if you look at it from like if you try and put it in context, actually, it's kind of one of the most incredible series of batters had in like this century, really, right? I mean, you think about the situation he comes into the captaincy in with what's happened that summer. You look at England having lost that first test quite heavily. You look at the fact that this is the only series win England in the last in India in the last 20 years at this point, and he makes what 300s, including like batting beautifully at Kolkata, I think, in that 190. Did it feel like that was properly extraordinary at the time, or because he's got kind of such like an unassuming style where he just accumulates, was it kind of like this is Cook being Cook and the other stuff is what's more ridiculous almost?
I mean, absolutely. I sort of the second answer of the unassuming style. You sort of just went about his business. I think what I said earlier about the consummate ease in the way in which he played the deliveries. I think batting at the other end, watching it was almost so simple. The ball would sort of leave the hand and be on a certain line, and he would sweep for one. The ball would come a bit straighter, he would defend. The ball would be. There was never an error of judgment, really, all the way through that series, which was all I thought was remarkable. When you consider, and that's what was remarkable about Alistair's career, was really the simplicity behind everything. Nothing was done. Perhaps didn't have. The Sehwags would do things that were sort of more out of the ordinary, and perhaps didn't have a pattern to it, if that makes sense. Whereas Alistair's batting had a real pattern and simplicity to it, and I think, there was no doubt. I certainly was, biting my lip in a way, thinking I'm out here, I'm batting with Alistair Cook in India, still standing 3 yards away from me. Kohli's chirping me about 3 or 4 meters away, but Dhoni, arguably one of the greatest sort of wicketkeeper batsmen behind me. I mean, and we're on 60, for example, and like, wow, like this is pretty special, and I'm just here to, I just kept saying, just stay with him. If I can stay with him, then we've got to be doing a job here. So for me, that gave me an enormous sense of pride, that I was actually standing there with Alistair. But yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, there was no doubt that the way he went about everything was just so easy. He never made a bad decision, which was remarkable.
And you obviously, the two of you had a great opening stand throughout the series. You averaged 70 for the first wicket, a couple of 100 stands in there. Was it made easier making your Test debut, having one of England's greatest ever at the other end, and especially with the way in which he goes about your business in terms of, stylistically, not a million miles away from each other, and in his terms of his approach is someone who also very much trusts his defence and to get through those difficult periods. So yeah, what was it like opening the batting on debut with Cook?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'd like to say, Cookie is a good friend and someone that is obviously of similar age. So I think there was a sort of respect that I certainly had for him, but I think also an understanding of the fact that I'd worked my way into the team, and I don't think he asked me to be anything other than what I'd done and what I'd done successfully. And I think it maybe in me, he was now the senior partner, whereas perhaps he was playing number 2 to Straussy for a number of years. He could now sort of automatically step up. He was now captain, and he had a partner that was going to fight tooth and nail to stay with him. I guess in some ways we definitely sang from the same song sheet. I think that was liberating for me to touch gloves with someone who would say at the end of every over, keep fighting, and that was kind of my mantra. And I think he understood that was my mantra too, if that makes sense. So I think there was an understanding there, and it did make it a lot easier, of course. I mean, you know, I think knowing that he wasn't going to give an inch, and that I wasn't going to give an inch, and you know, there was a sense of stability in that from the start, that we were going to do everything we could to give, you know, the powerhouse that was our England middle order the kind of foundation it needed. And they found it quite hard bowling at him as a left-hander, you know, especially the left arm spinner. You know, he found it easy to get off like, and therefore, you know, the scoreboard was moving, and that's what gave us that sort of stability. But absolutely no doubt, we definitely sang from the same song sheet, had a very similar outlook on batting, and the same probably said for Jonathan Trott as well.
You know, a lot of great England players had great series. Kevin Peterson scored that 100 at Mumbai. And then also at the end of the series, I think MS Dhoni described Jimmy Anderson as a difference between the two sides. Jimmy was brilliant in those last two test matches in particular. He took 6 wickets in that win in the third test match and was named player of the match in Nagpur for the fourth test. What did Jimmy do so well that series? Because, you know, otherwise it was a series dominated by spin bowlers.
Yeah, I mean, he was outstanding. I think that was probably the biggest question mark going into India. You know, spinners are going to do a job of sorts. I guess the big question is, you know, can the seamers sort of back them up? You know, Stephen Finn did a very good job too in the few test matches he played. But Jimmy was just, I mean, I think the unparalleled consistency and the subtlety of movements from a very consistent line is what really hit me. I mean, you had obviously Swanee and Monty coming on and providing the pressure and the wicket-taking attributes that they were during that series. And then when they came off, you know, Jimmy came on, and it was in and out, but off the, you know, 2 inches outside of off stump, you know, on that line, one going straight, one coming back in a little bit of reverse, field set quite straight. I mean, it was relentless. And I think, you know, that's when you realize that Jimmy wasn't just a bowler for English conditions. You know, you realize that, you know, there was an ability to adapt, and even though he didn't have, you know, searing pace, I think that ability to be so consistent was outstanding. I mean, it was subtle movement, and it was relentless, a bit like the spinners had been. So it was high class from all directions. And I think, and he managed to do it throughout the day. You know, I think that was, you know, we've always spoken about Jimmy's ability to still be playing international cricket at his age. So obviously fitness was key. And I think in a place like India, you know, you can't just have a seamer come on and late on in the day and bowl a few half volleys on the leg stump, and the spinners are tired, and now you sort of let the pressure go. He had come on, and it was, again, right on it throughout 5 days. And that was incredible.
Every time England go to India nowadays, the pre-test series chat is sort of dominated by what the pitch is going to be like. There's a lot of spin in 2021, and there's an assumption this time around that it's going to be more of the same again. You know, it can be hard to work out what pitches are like just looking at scorecards. How did you feel pitches were in 2012? Because it was 4 relatively high-scoring games with results in 3 of the 4 of the tests.
Yeah, I mean, they were decent pitches. You know, the seam, you know, there was a little bit of swing early on. I remember facing Zahir Khan early on. He had come on, and, you know, there was a bit of swing with the new ball. I mean, the ball didn't bounce hugely. It was very consistent on that front. So I think facing seam, you know, bar making a bad error or missing a straight one, doesn't pose too many threats. Although, you know, so I remember them getting their spinners on very early. There was no doubt they almost had one spinner and one seamer almost opening the bowling at times. So that was quite new, and not something that English players generally come up against. But I think the pitches were pretty good. They didn't spin excessively. I think they were fair. What do I feel like they'll be like in this series? You have a feeling that they might spin a little bit more, should we say? I guess, you know, they'll back their spinners over. So it wouldn't be a surprise if, you know, some of these tracks turned a bit earlier on. But there was never a pitch where you felt like this had been doctored or kind of heavily weighted in someone's favour. And I think they couldn't really do that, could they? Because I think arguably our spinners were better than theirs, which is not what you would often say or an Indian team would ever say. So I think they were slightly stumped in that situation. And meant that they had to sort of produce more sort of normal, bland, sort of flat tracks, really, that obviously offered a bit of turn, days, 3 and 4.
And I guess if anything, that pitch for the last test shows how hard it can be making pitches to order sometimes, because if you're chasing to save a series, that is the absolute last type of pitch you'd want, that one in Nagpur. I wanted to ask you about a moment in that game, because I was trying to remember what the series was like in terms of how the two sides got on. And when I was looking up, there was one bit in that Nagpur test where maybe Trott was lucky, or I don't know if he was lucky, but he survived a DRS appeal, I think, and then blew a kiss at Rohit Sharma, I think, afterwards. But I was wondering how the two sides kind of got on during the series. You mentioned Cody sort of maybe having a few words at some point in the middle, but was it generally pretty good natured? I mean, because India has such a proud home record that
I found it from that perspective less hostile. I say hostile is probably not the right word. I thought there would be a lot more chatter and a lot more pressure on me walking to the crease and throughout that series, apart from Kohli, who there was no doubt had quite a bit to say. But you had Dhoni, you had Tendulkar, you had Sehwag, three very quiet, calm, unmoving sort of characters who I don't know if they even, whether I was standing at the crease or whether there was a tree or a plant, I don't think they would have noticed. You know what I mean? I didn't feel like, oh, Nick's here, right, let's get on top of him, let's start sowing seeds of doubt. They barely looked at me. I don't think they really, they moved from one over to the next and proceeded to catch in the position that they were supposed to be. I felt it, that was a slight surprise to me. Kohli had quite a lot to say. I think that was quite interesting. I think there was a bit of banter going on throughout the series with him. I think with Pryor in particular, and that kept us sort of amused most of the way through. But in terms of the senior Samaritans, there was very little conversation. And I mean, the series was fine. There certainly wasn't much. There wasn't much socializing going on in between test matches. I think, teams are pretty self-focused. I think most teams keep to themselves anyway, and those guys tend to go and hide in their hotel rooms after days play. You don't see them loitering in the hotel receptions or what have you. So very little interaction. We had I think it was fine. There wasn't much there, but I think at the end it sort of got a little bit more heated. I think obviously they were sort of realized perhaps after the first test match, they thought, services will resume as normal. We've rolled, an international team and the series will be over. And I think it probably took them by storm the way we turned it around, and they probably didn't expect it. And I think by the time we'd sort of taken them, the momentum had shifted and they didn't really have those sort of characters. They certainly had the players to turn it around, but I think the momentum had shifted and they sort of didn't really know what to do.
Kohli's obviously gone okay since that tour, but that was Test 100 number 3 in that 4th Test match. Could you tell that this was a future great player watching Kohli back in 2012?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot had been said about him. I think KP and him were sort of chums or mates. So KP had played a lot in India and had played with these guys. So, I think he chatted to him a fair bit here and there. And, I think there was a consensus that, Kohli was going to be an outstanding player. Up until that point, we'd kept him, pretty quiet. I think the banter had been, we'd been quite pressured on him. We'd been quite tough on him. And obviously he was coming up against a pretty good bowling attack and he hadn't scored any runs. So, we'd done our job. It was kind of a shame that we let him get that 100 in that last test match. And he obviously played beautifully. But I think there was a feeling before that, this was a future great player. And there's no doubt you could see that, he had something. But it was interesting watching them play spin. I mean, for all the, you talk about Indians playing spin, the consensus is they're the best players of spin. But I didn't necessarily find that. I found that their play of spin was quite good against ordinary spin, but against good spin, they didn't play it that well, actually. And that was kind of what probably hit home watching that series, is I sort of thought, you're sort of standing there and you're trying to work out the state of play and you're watching Panesar bowl and you're thinking to yourself, what what are they going to do now? And, I just felt like we really got the better of them, and it was quite interesting to watch it. I remember Moeen Ali getting quite a few wickets in the next series, and, them not playing him particularly well. And, Mo's a very good bowler, but he's a standard off spinner. And so I do feel that there are chinks in their armor. I think against left arm spin, they'll milk you all day, and they obviously come up against that. But it was quite interesting and fascinating to see that when you got the better of them, and actually there was somebody bowling particularly well, they didn't have a huge answer against them.
I mean, moving forward to the upcoming tour, do you think England have a chance?
I mean, it's a pretty direct question. I think, of course, they have a chance. I think they have a slim chance. I'm going to be honest. I think it's going to be very tough, merely because I think we have a lack of match winners in the bowling department. I think the batting will be interesting. I think there's a lot of young talent, a lot of exciting, mixture of, talent and experience. I mean, Joe Root's highly, you expect him to go out there and be very adept at the spin and to score a lot of runs. The same probably said for Stokes. And some of the young players now, have a lot of tricks and are very good players at spin. So I think the batting department will be okay. I just think it's obviously taking 20 wickets that, is where I think England, where the main scrutiny will come, and who will do that. If you're a betting man, I think you're going with the home country. And that's nothing against England. And, we've seen England, make waves in the last sort of 2 years. So, I don't think they're going to go there with any sort of mindset like that. They're going to go out there to win the series, and so they should. I just think it'll be tough.
I think looking back at the 2012 series is one of those that the more that time passes, the more extraordinary achievement it appears. England won 2 test matches in that series. In 11 years since, India have lost three at home. Looking back now at the start of 2024, how do you feel looking back on that series and being involved in one of England's great modern day away series wins?
Yeah, I mean, it lives with me every day, I guess, in a good way. I think you hang on to those good moments. There's obviously times where you reminisce. I mean, having been sort of retired now for 4 years, I sort of reminisce about my career. There's times where you think deeply about it. I miss being professional. I miss playing and being so steely focused, and that sort of do or die mentality on this is the most important thing right now. And there's no doubt, that was a massive part. I mean, there's no that series was the greatest, period of my cricket career. To be a part of that series win, to be a part of that team, those players in that country against that opposition, and to be one of the 11 standing on that field, I think for me was just I suppose a pinch me kind of moment, to the timing to come to that point. I think it's something that I hold, very close to my chest, and I'm hugely proud of being a part of that. And I think every time I see the teammates that I played with, I think there is a bit of me that will always have a connection, them friends or not, or, whether you always be like, hey, we played in that series and I was a part of that. And I think, I think for me, I'll always remember that. And that's why I think India is such a favorite country of mine. I love going there every time. I still want to go there more. It's my favorite country. And I'll never forget hitting those winning runs in Mumbai, and, having my mother there, and all those, amazing sort of feelings that a lot of players, will get to feel, but some often don't. So I just count my lucky blessings that I was a part of it. And I think to win a series in India, I think the magnitude of that, and when you hear Kevin Peterson and some of the great players talking about what that series win means to them, it then makes it even more meaningful for me, because it was so huge in their own estimation, and they played 100 plus test matches and won Ashes series away. So, when you hear them talking about just how huge it was for them, I think for me it makes it even bigger.
Well, Nick, it's been great reliving that series with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, I loved it. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Next up, Mark Butcher joins the show to talk about England's preparation for the India series and Steve Smith's move up to the top of the order for Australia. Mark Butcher joins us from South Africa. There's been a lot of chat in the lead up to the England-India series about how little cricket England are playing. This isn't the first time England have done this. They didn't play a lot of cricket in the lead up to the 23 Ashes. Tour games in general, even predating the McCullum-Stokes era, is something that is becoming a thing of the past anyway. Butch, what do you make of the lack of preparation? They're spending 10 or so days in Abu Dhabi before going to India, and it looks like they're unlikely to have any sort of meaningful match practice before that first test.
I mean, I'd be a little bit terrified if I was playing. Most of the guys haven't played any long form cricket since July. Very few of the squad were involved a great deal in the sort of the rundown of the county championship, which finished in back end of September. And we're now 3 months down the road with nobody having had any sort of middle practice at all. It seems. Well, I mean, it's totally in keeping with the way that England are doing things, and their motto is basically, just because we've always done something before doesn't mean you should always do it forever and a day. But I think from a playing point of view, I would be a little bit concerned about not having felt that sort of competition, being out in the middle, taking guard on something where the runs you make and your wicket are important. So I mean, it's hard to see. England did a similar thing. In the lead up to the last Ashes series away from home, and we saw how that went. They did a similar thing leading into the Ashes series at home during the course of this summer, and were 2-0 down before they got going. You certainly couldn't say for sure that this England side, with the lack of experience or the lack of sort of hot shot spin bowling options in particular, would be in a position to do anything like what they did at home against Australia, and coming back from 2-0 down against this India team, who simply do not lose series at home. So it's, the only thing with it is it puts you under an enormous amount of pressure should it go badly. And people have been delighted with Bazball, unbelievably happy with the way that England have played under Ben Stokes, and it's been nothing but good vibes and good stories, really, barring the odd sort of selection issue perhaps from time to time. But I think everybody believes going to India, and you're unlikely to win a 5 Test match series in India, right? But what people will be less likely to be gentle about is if you go there without having done the requisite sort of getting ready for it and get battered. That's kind of inexcusable, particularly given that the huge gap that there's been for the Test team between July and now, whereby there's no real reason why they couldn't have spent 3 weeks in India leading up to the series.
In recent times, the accusation has been, well, actually, we've been unable to prepare against high quality opposition before Test series. Quite often, home boards put forward, essentially second string first class side. So the standard is way, way, way off what you get in a Test match. Occasionally, conditions have been way off what you get in a Test match. So England might say that that there's not that much to be gained from those sort of games. Do you think that almost no matter who you're playing against, there is value in having proper 11 versus 11 cricket ahead of the first Test match?
I think so. Yeah, I don't think that there's any getting away from that. It's England have got the Lions down there in India at the moment. They could have played a couple of 4-day games against them if they could have scheduled it right. Like I said, there's just there's no pressing reason. It's not as though they've just come off the back of a 5 Test match series leading up into Christmas and everybody needed a bit of a break. They literally had no cricket since the last Ashes Test match at the Oval. And so there was time and there was room to organise something if you were so inclined. They have not been so inclined, and therefore, if it all goes well, then they can turn around and stick 2 fingers up at the likes of myself and Steve Harmison and everybody else who's had their 2 penneth worth. But if it doesn't, it leaves the door wide open to sort of accusations that you're not taking it particularly seriously.
Well, at least they'll be fresh. Moving to Australia, David Warner has now played his last Test match, and Australia have announced their first squad for the post-Warner era. Surprisingly, I guess, because not many people were talking about this as an option at the start of the Australian summer, Steve Smith will now open the batting alongside Usman Khawaja, with Cam Green coming into the side at number 4. Australia head selector George Bailey has described this as about just getting your top the best 6 batters in the country in the top 6.
Yeah.
As someone who opened the batting and batted at 3 and 4 as well, what are the differences between the two roles, and also how straightforward a change do you think it is? Because this change, by the sounds of it, has actually come from Smith himself. He was the person who suggested this and put forward this option to the selectors.
Well, okay, let's start with the positive side of this. This is not a decision to make somebody or have somebody open the batting who is making a Test match debut, having never opened the batting in first class cricket. I mean, we can think of an example in Jason Roy, as somebody that was asked to do that. This is a legend of a player with a huge amount of Test match runs and experience behind him. And on a positive note from his side, you know, perhaps he's talked about it as well, that perhaps the edge has gone out of him a little bit in terms of run scoring, and perhaps he wanted another challenge, and this is it. You know, this is a chance to sort of reinvent himself in what is a very difficult position at the top of the order. So that's the positive side from it. The negative side from it, as far as I can see, is not just because Steve Smith sort of hasn't batted at number 3, hasn't batted in the top order now for maybe 5 or 6 years with any regularity. But it's also, how do you fill the gap with the runs that he makes batting at number 4? We've had this conversation going back years and years about Joe Root perhaps moving to number 3 instead of number 4. And I've always turned around and said, well, yeah, that's fine. And I don't see a massive issue with that. But then who bats 4 and scores the runs that he makes at number 4? And Australia, with picking Cam Green, who, you know, they're putting a lot of, he has an enormous amount of talent for sure, but hasn't really proven it at a Test match level yet with bat or with ball. And they're putting an enormous amount of hope that he will then come in and score the mountains of runs, important runs, tough runs for Australia that Steve Smith has done for so many years, batting at 4. And so, you know, there are your two sides to the argument. You try to cover over something that's missing by taking away from what is an absolute strength. It's a risky business doing that.
Do you think there's an element of, because this is West Indies at home and West Indies aren't bringing their full strength side, Jaden Seals isn't there, Jason Holder's not there, that actually, if you're going to try something a little bit funky, this is the time to do it?
Yeah. I mean, there certainly is an element of that. Although, you know, Mother Cricket will turn around to you and say you take people lightly at your peril, and sort of mess around with the game, with the gods of the game at your peril. But you would imagine, given Australia's absolute omnipotence, apart from when they play against India at home, would mean that it's not a huge risk for them to do it right now. But I think the risk is basically as I've laid it out. If you've got to replace Smith's runs at number 4, and it might not work for Smith at the top of the order, and then they have to think about rebalancing and rejigging the whole setup, having really upset people like Cameron Bancroft, who've averaged 50 in first-class cricket for the last few years as a specialist opener, who has basically just been overlooked as Australia tries something funky. And, you know, one of the things about Australian cricket has always been that, you know, people earn their caps. You know, if you're going to get a Test match cap, we don't mess around. We don't just give people a go. We make them earn them. Think Mike Hussey. Think, you know, players who've come to the fore at the latest. Chris Rogers, for example. And this moves quite a long way away from that absolute meritocracy and what the baggy green, or being given a baggy green, means in the position in which you are asked to do it. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes.
Absolutely. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next week. Ben, it was a few days ago now, but the Cape Town test between India and South Africa was the shortest test match ever, the shortest completed test match ever by balls bowled. It briefly threatened to be a one-day test. Siraj took 6 for 15 as South Africa were bowled out for 55 on the first morning. India were then going okay at 153 for 4, but then became the first side ever to lose 6 wickets for no runs. Aidan Markram scored a remarkable 100 when no other Proteas batter got to 13, and that was it really. I guess the question, Ben, for those who didn't watch the game was the pitch unsuitable? India had been pretty punchy in the aftermath of this game. Rohit said, I honestly don't mind playing on pitches like this as long as everyone keeps their mouth shut in India. Don't talk and don't talk too much about Indian pitches. Sunil Gavaskar suggested there are double standards at play when it comes to how low scoring pitches are described depending on where they are in the world. You watched a lot of that test unfold. How did you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it's great how we're already preempting what England might say in a few weeks' time. And let's be fair, probably will say, but still, it's funny that you can't even wait for that to happen before they get stuck into some of the reaction. It's also a bit of a shame in a way that we have to talk so much about the pitch in this game, because I thought it was just an amazing watch just from like an entertainment point of view. You wouldn't want every test match to be done in 4.5 sessions, but every once in a while it's so much fun. And like the thing with the pitch in this game, yeah, it was deemed unsatisfactory by the ICC, and I think that's probably fair. It was really hard to bat. There was seam movement, there was uneven bounce, but it also wasn't completely impossible to bat, as you saw from Gill, Kohli, and Rohit. They played 3 kind of match shaping innings. I guess they're only around 40, which I guess says something about the pitch as well. And then Mark obviously played absolutely astonishingly for that 100, and maybe you don't want a pitch where you have to play astonishingly to face just over 100 balls, but still it just about was possible to score runs, even if it was heavily tilted in favour of the bowler. And then the other thing is that those 2 teams are just so set up to play short test matches in a way. Like he said this was the shortest test match ever. If you use the metric of how frequently wickets have fallen in a test match, then throughout the whole of test history, South Africa have been involved in 3 of the top 20 since the start of last year. So this side they lose wickets quickly and they take wickets quickly. They've got Jansen at 7, like a very, very attacking, fast bowling attack, and a pretty weak batting lineup overall. And obviously India, they won the game. Their bats have a bit more sort of form and pedigree behind them. But when you get to number 8, it's not that surprising that they would lose 6-0 in a way, because it's Bumrah at 8, and then it gets worse from there on. And then if you're looking at actually the top order bats in the game, I think it felt like, especially in the first day, the defining feature was batters were getting out playing tends to be the balls they could have left. And obviously that's, as you said, in isolation, you could have left a ball if the ball is seaming a lot and if the ball is bouncing a bit inconsistently, you can say that like maybe you can't leave any balls in that situation because it could, pitch and shoot and go sideways kind of thing. But it didn't feel to me like low bounce was the issue on the first day. It was more that it was bouncing more than expected, and so then maybe you can leave a little bit more on length. Possibly it's incredibly tough thing to do, an incredibly easy thing to say. But yeah, not the best pitch. I don't mind seeing it once in a while. Unsatisfactory rating is probably fine, and I really enjoyed watching the test match.
Edward asks, long-time listener, first-time emailer, South Africa's abject batting display on day 1 at Newlands got me thinking, has there ever been an international team with a bigger differential between the quality of their batting and bowling? England in the mid to late 2010s at home, collapsing with the bat every other innings, but being consistently bailed out by Anderson and Broad comes to mind. Afghanistan until recently with a seemingly bottomless supply of top-class spinners, but no one who could consistently score runs. I think it's a fair point. South Africa have a genuinely world-class seam attack. Spinners as well, Keshav Maharaj is brilliant. Simon Harmer doesn't get a game. The spinners are good as well, but the seam attack is brilliant. But the batting lineup, I know they did well in the first test match. Dean Elgar got runs, but he's not around anymore. It's a very inexperienced / hit and miss top 6. So I think that's a pretty fair shout.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how they cope with Elgar no longer in the scene, because even as we've talked a lot about the state of South African cricket and their test team and worrying about what it will look like going forward, but they've maintained a pretty good home record. I mean, okay, England have actually got a pretty good record when they tour there, but they still have managed to beat India, or at least haven't lost series at home to India ever. They have remained competitive in home conditions, and as much as their bowling test part of that, Elgar's record at home is just absurd, and now they don't have that. So I guess Lowe's will just rest on Aiden Markram, who it's kind of felt like he's been on the cusp of coming of age for a long time, but this is the most real that's felt, I think. With that 100 was astonishing. Like a good stat from that actually is it's the lowest second score in a test innings to contain 100. So every other Test 100's come in innings where another batter's made at least 13, and that didn't happen in this game. And it was a brilliantly a brave innings, a technically brilliant innings, and a lot rests on him going forward. But there's, I guess we'll see as well on this tour of New Zealand, because some of those batters who are on that tour, like Zubair Hamza, for example, when he made his debut, I thought he looked pretty good. There's definitely talented players there. It's just whether they can sort of piece it together enough to maintain that home competitiveness, I guess.
Going back to what Sharma and Gavaskar said, and they claim there's double standards at play in terms of how people talk about pitches. You've overseen a bit of research into how the ICC view different sorts of pitches, sort of comparing what ratings are given for different types of pitches around the world. Is there anything surprising that you've seen in that research?
Well, one surprising that's probably worth framing it is that how ICC rate pitches has changed pretty recently and without much fanfare at all. And actually, the way that that's changed has made most of this kind of an academic conversation, really, because before they used to have this might be quite dry, but if we're talking about pitches, it's quite
no. We're an hour or so into the podcast, Ben. It's all good.
Cool. Okay. So it used to be that you had 5 ratings, which were very good, average, below average, poor, and then unfit. Now they've kind of removed poor, and they've also removed average as well, I think. So it's a very good, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, unfit. And if you get an unsatisfactory rating, you just get a 1 demerit point. And they've also upped the threshold for how you get a ban for hosting matches to 6 demerit points rather than 5 demerit points. So, like, very unlikely to get an unfit rating. That's only if it's dangerous. So that's if you're looking at an abandonment of a game, really. And then you get 1 point otherwise. So you need to be consistently short of the mark over a period of 6 games in 5 years to get that 1 year ban. That's pretty unlikely to happen. Having said that, still people do just care about how their pitches are viewed anyway, and fair enough. And it's hard to see much of a bias in what the ICC how they've rated pitches. And it's also worth saying that in their criteria, they do actually say that they will punish spin earlier in the game more than they will steam earlier in the game. So from that point of view, you might see that lower scores in spinning conditions are punished a bit more harshly to lower scores in steaming conditions, because that's how they say that they will do it. And again, there's a debate over whether that's the right way to go. But when you look at the numbers, I can get them up, but I fear it's already been quite dry.
No, I think it's interesting hearing the comparisons, because they did, I think from having looked at it earlier, they don't obviously overly punish spin-friendly pitches. So Bangladesh, for example, that were I think one Bangladesh pitch was recently given a negative rating, but otherwise Bangladesh, which is generally pretty spin-friendly conditions, very rarely gets any sort of punishment. And equally, actually, the pitches that arguably receive the most punishment are those that are extremely flat. So, which is also actually, India do produce the odd real road. The last Test match in the Australia-India series comes to mind, but a lot of Pakistani pitches have come for some criticism as well.
Yeah, and some Australia ones as well. I mean, going a bit further back, but the pitch that Cook made that double on ages ago was either rated below average or poor. And I kind of think that's a better way to tilt. I would rather pitches were tilted towards being a bit more bowler friendly than seeing I would much rather watch that test we had last week versus some of the tests that Pakistan have played, say, against Australia last year from an entertainment point of view. So yeah, there's I guess that the one thing from an India point of view is that India themselves, when you take about spinning conditions and look at India themselves, like they have it's over 11% of their pitches since July 2019 in Test cricket have been rated below average or poor, and I think is that the highest in the world, or it's maybe just below Pakistan? So they're the two who are lowest and second lowest in the rankings, and England haven't had an below average or a poor pitch in that time, and there have been some, some games where ball has dominated. Back one of those South Africa tests was at the Oval in 2022, where it was a very, very short game. So from that point of view, but I think that's almost a wider debate. It's hard to see like a specific bias in what the IC are doing based on what their metrics actually are, I think.
I'm sure the pitch chat will continue in the weeks and months ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, one of the big developing stories in English cricket over the New Year period is Colin Graves' anticipated return to Yorkshire. So Yorkshire are currently in dire need of financial support, and it looks like they are turning to their former chair, Graves, who has also served as the chair of the ECB. In response to this news, Sporting Equals, a charity that promotes ethnic diversity in UK sport, wrote an open letter to the Sports Minister, Stuart Andrew, saying, cricket has been making an effort to combat racism over the past few years. Since Azim Rafiq publicly exposed the deep systemic problems, the ECB, among others, have taken action to address these issues. However, the potential reinstatement of Colin Graves as chairman of Yorkshire would undermine the progress made. His reinstatement would send a message that emboldens those who perpetuate the myth that racism is simply banter, that it is enough to pay lip service to policies and procedures. It would make a mockery of the suffering of ethnically diverse players across the country. It would be a rejection of the ICEC's reports, thorough investigation and well-considered conclusions. This progress must not be stunted. In response, Yorkshire released a statement saying, Yorkshire County Cricket Club and agents acting on behalf of Yorkshire have met with over 350 interested parties to work through the validity of each and every genuine offer to refinance the club. No stone has been left unturned, and a thorough and rigorous process has been conducted by the board to ensure the club stays operational for the benefit of its members, creditors and employees. We refute any assertion to the contrary. There have been public claims that Yorkshire did not take other financial offers seriously, but Yorkshire strongly deny any of those claims. And I think it's worth just outlining a few facts around Graves. So Yorkshire in 2023 were found guilty of 4 charges by the Cricket Discipline Commission, 3 of which took place while Graves had no formal role at the county. The other was the most general charge, which was that Yorkshire failed to address systemic use of racist and or discriminatory language at the county. Earlier in 2023, Graves was publicly criticised by the ECB after saying the following in an interview with Sky Sports. I think there have been odd occasions where words would have been said that people may regret afterwards. I don't think it was done on a racist, savage basis. I think there was a lot of, and I know people don't like the word banter, but I think there could have been a lot of banter in there about it. And I know people don't like that. But when you play cricket and you're part of cricket teams and you're in cricket dressing rooms, that's what happened in the past. But the world has changed. Society has changed. It is not acceptable. I understand that. I accept it. Full stop. In response to what Graves said back in 2023, the ECB said, we are disappointed to see the comments made by Colin Graves on the historical racist issues at Yorkshire. We must never again hear of accounts like Azim Rafiq's where racist slurs are used as part of normalised everyday language. These events, along with many issues experienced by Azim and others during their time at Yorkshire, have been upheld more than once, including during proceedings overseen by the Cricket Discipline Committee. We vehemently disagree that this is just banter and believe that any debate in that regard should stop immediately. Racism isn't banter. Ben, there's a lot going on there, and Graves' return is controversial. You can see why people think those comments should preclude him from returning, but equally, Yorkshire insists that all other avenues to refinance the club were explored.
Yeah, and Yorkshire is a members club as well, so they kind of the choice will go to a vote with the members, right? And then they will have a say over what happens from here. And I would say that there's more to come on this. Like one of the things that Rafiq has been doing is putting pressure on sponsors. We're doing that publicly. And the Guardian reported that there is one sponsor who are sort of reviewing their relationship with the club. in light of this, and that also, even if the takeover goes through, that doesn't mean that the criticism will let up. There's been from politicians, there's been a couple of MPs to sort of have their say. I think one called it a retrograde step if Grave were to return, and say he would have been mistaken in thinking that Yorkshire should have been awarded an Ashes test last year and basically given their international hosting rights back. But then there is also, like, it's a Yorkshire in so much debt, a lot of which is owed to 50 million of which I think is owed to the Graves Trust back from the first into the club, which was then consolidated into the Graves Trust when he took on his role at the ECB to avoid any conflict of interest there. It's a very, very messy situation, and if Yorkshire if we're to take Yorkshire at face value, they have explored every possible avenue and have ended up here, then I kind of don't know what more you can say, I guess.
Yeah, it's worth saying we're going to return to this story in the next couple of weeks. There's still a lot to be confirmed and a lot more to come out. So we'll leave the discussion there for this week, but we promise to return to it in the weeks to come. Over in India, Australia followed their ODI series win with a 2-1 T20I series victory over India. India won the first game with 19-year-old newbie Titus Sandhu taking a forfeit. Kim Garth took 2 important early wickets in an Australia win in the second game. Then Australia comfortably chased down 149 in the third game. Phoebe Litchfield had another very good series, 49 in the first game, then a couple of red inkers in the games that followed. Ben, aside from the test match, a really good tour for Australia, really.
Yeah, and a really good tour from a cricket point of view. It was weird, wasn't it? Alyssa Healy was named player of the series somehow. She made so she got 89 runs, so I guess she was joint top scorer. But you look at Phoebe Litchfield, you wonder what she's done wrong, averaging 84, striking 147. She looks just absolutely top class, and a real sort of fillip for Australia to have won that, as they kind of are in a slight state of transition, I suppose. There was also an interesting thing with I guess comparing Healy as captain to Harmanpreet as captain, where Healy after that was basically trying to give the player of the match medal to the player of the series medal to Litchfield after the game, whereas I think it was after the second game, I believe, but I might be mistaken in that. There was India were kind of in it till the end, and then there was sort of a more expensive 19th over bowled by one of their bowlers. I think it was Sri Lanka, and Harmanpreet Kaur actually singled her out sort of in the post-match presser, saying, things didn't go well, and if she had hit the mark in that over, maybe things would have been different, which is an unusual move from a captain talking about a younger player. So just interesting to note the difference between the leadership styles there. And I guess also a slight disappointment for India as well, given that they might be the best test team in the world at the moment, but to lose to Australia is at home. I mean, that will be disappointing, I guess.
Yeah, I found those comments quite interesting as well, in that Patel didn't bowl a very good penultimate over, but India were well behind the game at the start of that over. Australia only needed 15 from 12 balls with 2 set batters at the crease. So Australia still looking good even in overseas conditions. David asks an important question as a nod to rumours of Disney getting the TV rights for the India series. Which Disney character would you least like to face up to? My answer is something about the chaotic limbs of Woody from Toy Story suggests to me that his action might be terrifying. Ben?
Yeah, well, this is tough just because Disney isn't everything Disney these days. I mean, they own Marvel, right? So you could pick any Marvel character. It would be that much fun facing a bouncer from Iron Man, I guess. And they also own ESPN and Cricinfo, so you could pick any of their panelists. I don't know. Is Akash Chopra, does he count as a Disney character? Maybe not quite, but if we're sticking to Pixar, I was thinking that Wreck-It Ralph looks like he bowls a heavy ball, I think. So yeah, probably him.
The question follows the news at the time of recording. No broadcast agreement has been put in place for the England Test Tour in India that starts in, I think, 15 days' time. It's been reported by the paper that Disney may well show it. It's worth remembering that back in 2021, when Channel 4 showed it, it was only confirmed extremely late in the day, and that tends to be how the BCCI operate for overseas rights. So it is extremely possible that it is shown in some capacity in the UK, but that doesn't get confirmed until literally the day or maybe 2 days before. I seem to remember there was an IPL once where the rights were only confirmed at the very, very last minute, and it kept on going between Sky and BT. Conflicting press statements released by various parties. So yeah, I think it will. I mean, it'll be an absolute travesty if it's not shown, but I think it will be shown in some capacity.
Yeah, and if it's not shown, you can get all the up-to-date info on the Wisden Cricket Daily podcast. So
oh yeah, we're going daily for the India series. Got a couple of exciting announcements. One we'll save for next week. But yeah, we will be going daily for the England series. I think the timing of the test probably works quite well for the daily show. I think the test match finishes, the no day nighters for this series. So the games start at 4 a.m. UK time, finish at around about 11. So hopefully we'll have the podcast ready to go in your feed by your lunch break. Don't want to promise that, but that's what we will aim for.
Robert, take a late lunch through that series.
Yeah. So if you take a really late lunch break, we'll make sure that the podcast is ready for you by then. On that India series, Robert writes in to say, reflecting on the makeup of the England team against India after the discussion on the last pod, I'm genuinely baffled by the selectors' thinking. In a world where England are brave enough to select Folkes and bat him at 6, surely Sam Curran would have fitted well at 7 with Rahan Ahmed at 8. This would allow England to balance the side with 5 bowlers. He's not had the best of years, but surely he's a Baz bowler. And if not, why not a punt on a Jamie Overton or a bowler who can at least hold a bat? Can't blame Wokes for not being up for it at this stage of his career, but really odd they've not tried to replace him, knowing full well Stokes is a batter only at this point. It's hard to see how England make any impact with such an imbalanced team. I guess it's an interesting question for a few reasons, and actually we had a few people write in as well and actually say they just assume that Root will be England's second spinner, and that's how England get 5 bowlers in their side. I guess what we didn't really explicitly touch on with Compton was that when England got their balance right, in inverted commas, on that 2012 tour of India, they actually had a pretty similar balance to what we expect them to go with in 2024, in that once Bresnan was dropped at the start of the series and Panesar came in, it was pretty much 6 batters, keeper, 4 bowlers, and 2 of those are spinners. The big difference this time round is, do you trust England spinners Leach +1 to get through the overs that Panesar and Swan did? But yeah, more generally in response to Robert's email, Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, well, England had something to tell for part of that series, well, didn't they? And that it does make it. It's funny because when you talk about Bazball, you talk about these big sort of like sweeping things about like style of playing. It feels almost like if like England themselves are going to be worrying about who's their third part-time spinner and how, and that sort of thing. But these things, they kind of do matter. But yeah, I think that's just based on the squad England have picked. That says to me that they are planning on going in with 4 bowlers, 6 batters, one of whom is Root, who can bowl a bit, and Folkes. And as I said on last week's pod, I think it's weird, or maybe it's the week before, that I think it's weird that that they haven't given themselves the options, because there are all-rounders in England outside of Ben Stokes and Moeen Ali. I mean, Chris Wokes actually sounded. I mean, he was saying at the end of last summer, sort of, probably won't be going, and that's kind of fine. But sounded a bit more disappointed when the squad was actually named. And he's an agreeable enough guy that I'm sure he'd have been up for it. And yeah, Curran would have been an option. But I guess the one way to look at it is that England think positively, and so they will think that the players they pick, the bowlers they pick, will be able to do the job, and they don't want to be thinking about who's going to bowl if we're 120 overs in the dirt, because that's not how they think about these things. And they'll just back, okay, if we pick Shoaib Bashir, we think he will get through enough overs to and be able to to do the job that we needed to do. And if we pick James Anderson, that he can bowl the overs that we need him to with a bit of protection, and that and that Mark Wood can take wickets quickly enough, say that he doesn't need to be bowling 15, 20 overs in an innings. So I guess that's how they see it. They'll see it positively, and then maybe that plan will change if India put up 550 in the first test and it doesn't quite work. But I think they'll basically back themselves to go positive. So 6 batters, back them to make enough runs, 4 bowlers, back them to take enough wickets, and I don't know if that's old school thinking of baseball, if that's like positive thinking of baseball, but that's what I think they will do. But it is odd they don't have any all-rounders.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they have so few all-round options as well. And I think that there is flexibility in that squad. That emailer that I mentioned was right in saying that it could be that there's a test where Root is effectively England's second spinner that gives them more depth in both departments. I'm sure Root's going to bowl loads of overs on this tour. And, Rahan Ahmed could bat 7. He bats top 6 and does so pretty well for Leicester in the county championship. So I think they do still have some options. I still think the wider English cricketing public is probably not quite aware of the sort of selection gymnastics that they'll have to do to sort of pick a top 6. I think a lot of people assume that Folkes is coming in, and as we talked about in the last couple of weeks, it's really quite difficult to fit Folkes and a returning Ollie Pope back into the side. Like, I don't think there's a world where you play both. I might be wrong, but I think it's going to be very, very difficult to do that. So yeah, it'd be really interesting. And yeah, as we mentioned already in the show, there are no warm-up matches. So it's not as if we're going to get clues as to how England are thinking in the games before the tour, because there aren't any games. Anyway, that is everything for today's show. Cheers, Ben. It's been a long show. Well done for getting through it. We'll be back next week with a couple of special guests as we build up more to the start of that England-India series.